Information discussed in this podcast may be sensitive in nature to some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. It was a chilly spring Idaho day when Janine took her little boy Jason outside to play. Jason's older brother was at school, but it was afternoon now and he'd be coming home any time. Janine was also baking brownies for her boys. It was really just a typical day in the life of the Cannon family. Around 2:00 p.m., the air turned brisk and Janine went inside to grab a jacket for Jason. Jason was playing outside on the front porch. While she was inside, she peeked at the brownies in the oven, grabbed Jason's jacket, and went back outside. Still holding the jacket in her hands, Janine froze. Jason was not on the porch. He wasn't really known to be a wanderer, so she felt confused in that moment. Where was her boy? She began looking around and calling out for him, but was met with complete silence and fear. Her 2-year-old had vanished. She called the Boise Police Department and the search for little Jason began. It was all hands on deck for this missing toddler. Where is Jason Keith Cannon?
So, first question is, what level of patience and persistence does it take to tackle a monumental old case like that?
It can be frustrating. I mean, going through a cold case, it's like looking through a needle in a haystack. You're looking for any kind of clue or piece of evidence that, was missed. I think the big thing now with cold cases is that people are looking for evidence that we now have, or that we have now, that we didn't have the technology for back then.
3 underwater divers combed the clogged waterway inch by inch from the Cannon residence to where it dumps into the Boise River about a mile downstream. There was no sign of young Jason. Kidnapping still has not been ruled out. With the possibility of a drowning almost entirely ruled out, the question remains, where is young Jason Cannon?
Jason Cannon was born to Janine Cannon on May 7th, 1980. He would live in Boise, Idaho with his mom, his older brother, and his stepdad. Jason was a playful and happy-go-lucky toddler. He adored his older brother, and when his brother went off to school, Jason would sit anxiously and wait all day for him to return. And on March 16th, 1983, this is exactly what was happening at the Cannon household. The weather was pretty decent that day. Finally, after a cold winter, spring was almost here, and there were some parts of the day now where the sun came out, and the air, although still a little bit cool, was tolerable for playing outside. Anyone who lives in a colder climate knows the excitement of finally getting a nice day and being able to go outside after a long winter. So on the afternoon of March 16th, Janine decided to bake some brownies and take Jason outside to play for a bit. They mainly stayed on the front porch area of their apartment, and Janine watched as Jason played. Occasionally, he would look up for his brother's arrival. It was 2:00 in the afternoon, and Jason, even at just 2.5 years old, knew his brother was due home very soon. After they were outside for a bit, Janine decided that even though it was nice out and the sun was shining, the air was still a little chilly, and she wanted to go grab Jason a jacket. She also wanted to check on her brownies, so she went back in the home, leaving Jason on the porch. She felt he'd be okay since she'd be inside for only a minute or two. But that wasn't the case. Janine went back out on the porch with Jason's jacket in hand and froze in place. Jason wasn't there. She called for her son, she looked all over for him, but she couldn't find him anywhere. And this didn't make any sense to her. Jason wasn't a wanderer, and he had been excitedly waiting for his brother to get home. And he was excitedly waiting for the brownies to be done. So where would he go? And why would he go anywhere? Very quickly, Janine called the Boise Police Department to report her son as missing. And of course, since Jason was only 2.5 years old, the police force came out in large numbers to search for this little boy. But they weren't finding him either. And pretty soon their worry grew when they realized how close this apartment was to the Sand Creek Canal, just about 50 feet away. Fear now began to grow that little Jason wandered into the water and maybe fell in, so they immediately began to search the waterway. But Janine really had a hard time believing that. Jason had never wandered over to the water before. And even when he had been with his mother, he was too afraid to even walk close to the water. The canal was fairly shallow, and it was pretty easy to search. And at first, nothing was found. After a little while, however, one of the searchers found a child's toy bucket. This was kind of on the banks of the canal. Now, this detail is mentioned in a few articles on the case, and there are only a few brief articles. And it is said that a friend of Jason's verified that it was his bucket. But I do have questions about that. Who is this friend of a 2-year-old? Is this another small child? Did his mother or his older brother confirm that this bucket was Jason's? Now, I can't say for certain all of the details. Of course, this case happened so many years ago. But investigators do believe, or are working on the belief at least, that this bucket belonged to Jason. This bucket was found, as I said, on the banks of the canal, about 1/3 of a mile down. So this intensified the search in that area for Jason, but still nothing else would be uncovered. Investigators were baffled. If he had wandered to the canal and he would have fallen in, they would have found him. They would have found something of his, a shoe, an article of clothing, something, and they truly believed they would have found Jason. The canal was pretty small and it's shallow. Now, this canal does flow into a larger pond, and extensive searches were done there as well, even though the belief was that he wouldn't have made it that far down the canal. And there were still no signs of Jason there at the pond either. Beyond the pond, although not directly connected, flows the much larger Boise River. Now, to err on the side of caution, and because everyone was desperate to find this 2-year-old, they didn't want to leave any stone unturned, divers were sent into the Boise River as well. But again, no sign of Jason. Of course, while all this was going on, there were other officers dispatched to search the land around the apartments and also talk to the neighbors. Nobody really saw anything except possibly one neighbor who reported seeing a mysterious gray van driving slowly around the apartment complex. No one knew who owned this gray van. No one remembered seeing a gray van before in the neighborhood. But the driver of this van was never identified. And beyond that one neighbor's recollection of seeing this van, no other clues were brought up regarding this van. So soon, authorities labeled Jason's disappearance as a non-familial abduction. They did not suspect any family members, and they were certain now that the boy was not in the water. But as days and weeks and months went by, there were still very few clues in Jason's case. There was one sighting that did seem promising at one point. Someone reported seeing Jason with an older man in downtown Boise. This lead, however, could never be corroborated, but for some reason, the lead was taken very seriously, and authorities thought that this might actually be Jason. Now, checking out this area further on Google Maps, we're kind of in the northern Boise area. I can see street images back to 2007. How different could this area have been back in 1983? Possibly very different, or perhaps not much different at all. What I can tell from my future perspective, at least, is there is quite a bit of water nearby. There's the canal, there's creeks, there's rivers, all of which are flowing into ponds. And overall, even if you just look at Google Maps, there's a lot of blue. But also what strikes me is that Janine said that Jason had been playing on the front porch. Now, according to these images from what I can see, The front porch of these units on North 32nd Street, where they lived, faces the road, and the canal would be behind the property. Jason would have had to walk around to the back of the home to get to this canal. The front of these units, where Jason was allegedly playing, are very close to the road, perhaps 25 to 30 feet from front door to the roadside. It would be quick and easy to pull up, grab the child, and leave. But if that's what happened, no one saw or heard anything. And this was the middle of the afternoon, broad daylight. Granted, since it was the middle of the day, it's very possible that many people were at work. There are a couple of very close by interstates, and one that does stand out to me the most would be Interstate 84. This highway runs northwest all the way to Portland, Oregon, and south down to Salt Lake City. A quick and easy route out of the city of Boise. If somebody were to have come and scooped up Jason, they could easily and possibly quickly make an exit out of the city. But there is more unsettling information in the case of Jason Cannon. He wasn't the only male toddler to go missing in that region of the United States in the 1980s. In fact, within the state of Idaho, there were several. Now, there are two that really jump out as being very similar to Jason's story. Curtis Fair was a 2-year-old boy who vanished from Nampa, Idaho on November 5th, 1980. He was last seen playing in a neighbor's front yard along the 300 block of 15th Avenue North, which was not far from his home. Despite extensive searches at that time, Curtis was never found. Now, at first, just like in Jason's case, authorities believed that he might have fallen into a nearby creek, the nearby Indian Creek. But even after very thorough searches of the waterway there, no sign of Curtis was found. And the creek theory never could really be confirmed. They truly believed they would have found Curtis in this creek had he been there. Over the years, investigators have considered the possibility that Curtis was abducted, and his case has been classified as a non-familial abduction. Now, where this took place in Nampa, Idaho, this is just about 20 miles west of Boise, less than a 30-minute drive. And how would you get from Boise to Nampa? You would take Interstate 84. Curtis, like Jason, had very light complexion and had blonde hair and was very similar in size. In fact, they looked very similar. 2 years later, Richard Barnett vanished from Grangeville, Idaho. Richard, who went by Ricky, was just 2 years old when he disappeared from his grandparents' dairy farm just north of Grangeville, Idaho, on August 31st, 1982. That morning, Ricky had been sitting in a hay wagon outside a chicken barn as workers were unloading a shipment of chickens. When his family finally noticed he was missing, a short time later, a very extensive search began involving more than 250 volunteers, law enforcement officers, and search and rescue personnel. There were also bloodhounds brought out, and the dogs would find a scent. They followed the scent trail to a fence line on the northwest corner of the farm before it would abruptly end. And despite several days of searching nearby fields, barns, sheds, waterways, there was no sign of Ricky ever found. Now, over the years, theories have ranged from an accidental disappearance to a possible abduction, and for some time, suspicion fell on the grandparents, although no charges were ever filed and the grandparents were later cleared. Ricky had light brown hair and was about the same size also as Curtis and Jason. Now, Grangeville is about 3 to 4 hours north of Boise, quite a bit further away. But it was also said that the Barnett family had ties to Boise. So in a time span of 2 years and 4 months, 3 toddler boys, all light complexioned, all looking similar, all the same size, all vanished from their front yards. To date, none of them have been found, and there are no additional clues as to their whereabouts or what happened to them. This, of course, would lead many to wonder if there was some type of black market adoption ring happening here, or if there was someone out there searching for a very specific looking toddler and waiting for an opportunity to take them right out of their yards. Of course, it's also possible that all three of these cases are completely unrelated as well. In 2020, Boise Police Department Violent Crime Unit began investigating Jason's case. Many detectives and officers have come forward to talk about how this young boy's case has haunted them and they want to find answers. They refuse to close this case and they will continue to keep working it. And it's quite understandable. This is one of those hard to forget cases. Jason was just a couple months away from his 3rd birthday. He was an innocent child who was just playing outside and whose disappearance affected everyone who worked on this case and the entire community. In 2024, detectives began to utilize forensic genetic genealogy to help find answers. They have obtained DNA from family members and have begun trying to search databases, trying to find any connections they can in the event that Jason is still living out there as someone else, or if any unidentified remains have been uncovered. So what do you think happened to Jason Cannon back in March of 1983? Back then, Jason was described as a blonde-haired, blue-eyed little boy. It's hard to say what he might look like today because he was so young when he vanished, and because there are only 2 photographs of him in existence that we know of, there haven't been any age progression photos created for him. But if you do by chance have any information on what may have happened to Jason Cannon, please contact the Boise Police Department at 208-377-6606. Jason disappeared over 40 years ago, so information out there on his case is quite scarce. But I do want to thank the following sources used in researching Jason's story: NamUs, the Doe Network, KTVB, the Idaho Statesman, CBS 2 Boise, and the Charlie Project. As the detectives earlier stated, cold cases are still being worked as new technology has helped solve many of these. Many of the oldest and toughest cases across the world are finally seeing answers. Just because so much time has gone by does not mean we should give up. Jason, we are still looking for you. We are still talking about you, and we are still remembering your story. One day, you will be found. Thank you so much for listening to Jason's story today. We will be back again very soon with another unsolved missing person story. And until then, stay safe and hug your loved ones.